the United States of America, the land of opportunity and the realization of dreams. But sometimes, in this country, events occur that shock us with their cruelty and injustice. Today, I will tell you about one such case that happened to a young woman named Paige Birgfeld. Hey everyone, you're on the DBS channel, and my name is John Brooks. You'll be shocked by this story, believe me, and make sure to listen to the end because that's where it gets the most interesting. Paige was born on April 27, 1973, in Atlanta, Georgia. She was the second child in a family of immigrants from the Mariana Islands, Suzanne and Frank Birgfeld, and had an older brother named Craig. Paige's parents were hard-working people who often stayed late at work, but despite their busy schedules, they always made time for their children. It's worth noting Paige's father, Frank, in particular. This man had an incredible talent for balancing his career with raising his son and daughter. His professionalism and abilities did not go unnoticed at the National Association of Securities Dealers. Frank received an offer he couldn't refuse, but it required relocation. That's how the entire family ended up in the state of Colorado. Paige graduated from high school and decided to dedicate herself to medicine. She enrolled in the nursing school at the University of Florida. It was there that fate brought her together with Howard Beigler, a young man who later became her first husband. Sparks flew between Paige and Howard, and they started dating. After completing her studies, Paige returned to Colorado and continued living with her parents. But just a year later, in 1995, Paige and Howard got married. It seemed like the perfect union of two loving hearts who shared many common interests and had the same outlook on life. However, something was found that shattered their marital bliss. Paige dreamed of becoming a mother, while Howard categorically did not want children. Just like today, many young people believe that being child-free is the norm. Excuse me, I'm a bit older, and for me, having children is a duty to America. Paige and Howard repeatedly tried to find a compromise on the issue of children. They talked for hours, argued, and sought a solution that would satisfy them both. But all attempts to reach an agreement proved futile. Eventually, in 1997, after a long period of reflection and hesitation, the couple made the difficult decision to divorce. However, despite the separation, Paige and Howard maintained a warm, friendly relationship. Their bond was too deep to sever it completely. Finding herself at a crossroads, Paige decided to radically change her life. She got a job at one of Denver's strip clubs under the pseudonym Madison. It was there that she met Rob Dixon, a man who was set to inherit a sizable fortune from his family business. Passion ignited between Paige and Rob, and just a year later, in 1998, they tied the knot. The young couple settled in a luxurious house in Colorado. There, Paige was finally able to fulfill her cherished dream of becoming a mother. 3 years after meeting Rob, they had 3 wonderful children, Taft, Trigger, and Jess. From then on, they became the meaning of Paige's life, the center of her universe. It seemed that Paige's life had finally become perfect. She was married to a man she loved, who filled her existence with special meaning. Their home was filled with luxurious items. Paige lived in a spacious mansion and drove expensive cars. She sincerely believed that it would last forever. But suddenly, everything began to crumble like a house of cards. This was truly unexpected, and I'll tell you all about it, but only to those incredible people who haven't forgotten to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and write in the comments what you think about my video. Is it good, or is there still room for improvement? Your opinion is important to me. Some of Rob's businesses began to experience serious problems. The financial situation deteriorated at a catastrophic rate. In the end, Rob had no choice but to declare bankruptcy. The financial catastrophe that befell the Dixon family became a real test for their relationship. Tension grew every day, poisoning the atmosphere in the house. In 2004, the situation reached a critical point. During another fierce quarrel, Paige, driven to despair, dialed the emergency service number. In a voice trembling with fear and indignation, she reported that her husband had threatened to kill her. Moreover, Rob uttered the same terrible words to the children while Paige was at work. Several police officers immediately responded to the call to protect the woman and the kids from potential danger. But when they arrived at the Dixons' house, they were met by Paige and Rob, standing side by side at the door. The woman assured the officers that they had already resolved their differences, and the help of law enforcement was no longer needed. But a year passed, and Paige called the police again. This time, she reported an assault by Rob. The circumstances of the incident were strikingly different from those that took place a year earlier. According to Paige, her husband hit her at the moment when she was holding their youngest child in her arms. Rob was summoned to the police station, where he was charged with third-degree assault. Eventually, as part of the criminal proceedings, he pleaded guilty to one of the counts of harassment. However, the case was closed, and Rob managed to avoid a prison sentence. But even despite this, the relationship between the spouses became utterly unbearable. Paige and Rob lashed out at each other at the slightest provocation. Finally, realizing that things could not continue like this, they decided to put an end to their marriage. Paige understood that now she would have to provide for herself and the children alone. She was ready to take responsibility. She started a business manufacturing baby carriers, while simultaneously teaching dance lessons to toddlers and selling kitchenware at one of the companies. Paige did not forget about her little ones, finding time for their upbringing, attending parent-teacher association meetings, and participating in playgroups. Friend, a very important point. Creating this kind of content requires a lot of time, and right now, my channel and I are going through a difficult financial situation. I would be immensely grateful if you become a sponsor of this channel and support me with your donation. And in return, I will be able to respond to you personally in the comments and also mention your noble name in my video. Sorry for the pause. There won't be any more in this video. On June 28, 2007, exactly 1 year after breaking up with Rob, Paige disappeared without a trace. On that fateful day, she left her children in the care of her close friend Carol Linderholm, who worked part-time as her nanny. Everyone who knew Paige noted her punctuality and responsibility, especially when it came to the children. Therefore, when she did not return home on time and did not answer calls, her family sounded the alarm. Carol tried to calm herself down, assuming that her friend was simply buried in work and would soon appear or at least call back. Paige's daughter, Jess, left her mom several voice messages, desperately begging her to come home soon. Friday passed, Saturday came, and there was still no news from Paige. Then 8-year-old Jess, tired of waiting, decided to take action. Together with the nanny, the girl went to the police station to report her mother missing. On the same day, a representative from the sheriff's office contacted Paige's father, Frank, and told him the terrible news. His daughter had disappeared. The man clutched his head, realizing that something horrible had happened. He tried to call Paige, but to no avail. Then Frank called his eldest son and told him everything that had happened. A large-scale search operation began, and during its course, a disturbing incident occurred. On the first Sunday of July 2007, a red Ford Focus belonging to the missing Paige was found. The car was parked in an area where the woman did not usually go, and it was engulfed in flames. The circumstances of the fire raised serious suspicions for the district attorney. He suggested that the ignition was intentional since nothing else around the car was burning. It became clear that the cause of the fire was by no means an accident. The prosecutor also noted, if earlier Paige's case was considered a missing person case, now it should be classified as an abduction, and it is possible that the woman is already dead. The officers made every effort to find as many leads as possible and track down the mother who disappeared in broad daylight. Paige's car was immediately thoroughly examined. The investigators hoped to find evidence that would indicate the woman's whereabouts or at least allow them to understand what had happened to her. Sergeant Whaler from the county sheriff's office explained, arson is often used to destroy evidence such as hair, DNA, and fingerprints. But in the end, the inspection of the car provided valuable information to the experts. The driver's seat was pushed back as far as it would go. This indicated that the last person behind the wheel of the Ford was someone tall. Paige, whose height was 164 m54, physically could not have reached the pedals at such a distance. In the trunk, they found the missing woman's diary. Someone had torn out pages for the period from June 26 to June 29. With each passing hour, the search for Paige intensified. Abandoned areas and adjacent desert plots were examined. In addition to law enforcement officers, relatives and numerous volunteers joined the operation. The missing woman's brother, Craig, flew in from the West Coast to support his parents and nephews. He, like the rest of Paige's loved ones, bought a one-way ticket. Craig understood that he would only return home when his sister was found, alive or dead, and he was ready to dedicate as much time to the search as needed. Meanwhile, the police began questioning people from Paige's inner circle. Among them was her ex-husband Rob, who was living in Pennsylvania at the time. Investigators learned that during their married life, Paige had filed 2 domestic violence reports against Rob. During the interrogation, they tried to find out when exactly Rob had come to Colorado. Of course, the ex-husband insisted that on the day of Paige's disappearance, he was at home and could not have harmed her in any way. After talking to the police, Rob actively joined the search for his ex-wife. It seemed that he was genuinely concerned about her fate. All of Paige's relatives wanted only one thing: to find her as soon as possible and explain to the children what had happened to their mother. The investigators also took an interest in the missing woman's first husband, Howard, with whom she had resumed communication after divorcing Rob. Howard said that he was one of the last people to see the young mother alive. On June 28, they met in Eagle County, Colorado, since this place was convenient for both of them in terms of their business. After spending Thursday together, the former spouses went their separate ways. According to Howard, after returning, they still communicated by phone. When the man learned about Paige's disappearance, he immediately contacted the emergency services. While talking to the operator, Howard noted that he had seen Paige shortly before her disappearance, and he expressed the conviction that something bad had definitely happened to her because she would never have abandoned her children. The recording of this conversation was confirmed by data from a cell phone tower, according to which Howard was in the Denver area on the day of Paige's disappearance, several hours' drive away from her. The police work is not perfect. They needed to act even faster, and this is all because of stupid and senseless protocols. The system needs reforms, and that's why I'm not going to vote in the elections for either the capitalist Trump or the communist Biden, because neither of them has a clear plan on how to save people faster and make the appropriate reform for this. Cops shouldn't be biased by silly paperwork instead of looking for a missing person. Excuse me, it's just like a lump in my throat. America deserves other candidates. This data allowed the police to exclude Howard from the list of suspects. A few days after the discovery of Paige's burning car, a new find was made. A random driver who stopped on the shoulder of the highway leading southeast of the city to replace a flat tire noticed a checkbook lying nearby. He immediately reported this to the authorities. Upon careful examination of the roadside area, Paige's medical records, her insurance, and some other personal belongings were also found. Sergeant Whalen noted that several pages had been torn out of the checkbook, and it seems that Paige herself deliberately left these clues, as the items were scattered at a certain distance from each other. The business card found on the road became the key to unraveling Paige's mystery. It turned out that the missing woman was leading a double life. Under the name Carrie, she provided escort services. This information opened up a whole unknown world to the police, the existence of which they had not even suspected. Paige had a separate phone from which she made calls related to her secret work. Thanks to this mobile phone, detectives gained access to the list of people with whom the missing woman communicated in the last hours before her disappearance. The last call from this phone was made on June 28 at around 9 p.m. 7 people immediately made it onto the list of suspects. One of them was named Lester Ralph Jones. The investigators were seriously interested in this man's criminal past. Among the offenses he had previously committed were violence against women and kidnapping. For the latter crime, Lester had received a 5-year prison sentence. Another detail caught the attention of the investigators. Lester had a white car that closely resembled the one mentioned by Carol, Paige's friend and nanny. Carol told the police a story she had once heard from Paige herself. One time, the woman left the office she was renting and headed towards her Ford. But her path was blocked by an unfamiliar white car parked right behind her vehicle. An enraged Paige got behind the wheel, managed to turn around, drive off, and even hit the white car. The driver immediately fled the scene, leaving Paige alone. At first, the investigators assumed that Lester, who was obsessed with Paige, could have been stalking her. To understand what kind of relationship the missing woman had with this man, the police had to carefully study the records of her calls. It turned out that 55-year-old Lester Jones worked as a mechanic specializing in repairing recreational vehicles. The day before Paige's disappearance, he tried to make an appointment with her. As the investigators found out, the woman was already acquainted with Lester, so she felt uncomfortable accepting him as a client. Paige asked Carol, who sometimes provided massage services to escort service clients, to go to the meeting with Lester instead of her. Her friend initially refused but eventually agreed and went to meet with the man. Later, she described Lester as a very tall and oppressive guy. Carol told the detectives that as soon as he saw her, the man immediately expressed his desire for intimacy. To which the woman replied, In that case, she would have to call the police. The investigators continued to meticulously study Lester's life, and they discovered an interesting fact. His workshop was located very close to the place where Paige's car was burned, right across the street. The police summoned Lester for questioning again, and he agreed to come and talk without hesitation. The man's boss, Mike, characterized his subordinate as a conscientious, hardworking, and honest worker. On July 5, 2007, another interrogation of Lester took place. He answered all the investigators' questions and denied having any information about Paige's disappearance. Lester behaved in a very friendly manner, voluntarily provided his fingerprints and DNA samples in case they needed to be compared with those found at the crime scene. Despite his attractive appearance and impeccable manners, the man did not resemble a criminal at all. But there was one detail that made the police look closely at Lester. His height was 198 m66, and the position of the driver's seat in Paige's car perfectly matched a person of that height. The investigators considered this a very important fact and continued to keep the mechanic under suspicion. After obtaining a warrant to search Lester's residence, the police carefully inspected his personal belongings, and they found quite a lot of interesting things. Among the findings were a disposable phone, men's wigs, Viagra, a piece of paper with the words massage and the Escort service number, bras of various sizes, and women's underwear. The disposable phone attracted the most attention. It turned out that on the day of Paige's disappearance, someone had tried to call her several times from an unregistered number. During the interrogation, Lester denied having a disposable phone. That is, he outright lied to the police. The packaging found in Lester's house helped the detectives figure out that the disposable phone was purchased at a supermarket on North Avenue. After reviewing the footage from the store's surveillance cameras, the investigators recognized Lester. But when the suspect was shown the footage with himself, he flatly refused to admit that it was him. The next step was to involve a service dog from the police canine unit. The dog not only detected that Paige's body had been in the burned-out car for some time, but also sensed Lester's scent inside the vehicle. Despite the progress made, all the evidence against the mechanic was circumstantial. Therefore, the prosecutor's office refused to press charges against him. Sergeant Whaler explained that although they were convinced of Lester's guilt, given Paige's lifestyle and her underground business, without the victim's body, it was impossible to hold the man accountable. The investigation reached a dead end for several years, and all this time, Paige's relatives and friends were beside themselves with grief. But suddenly, in 2012, a traveler stumbled upon human remains on a mountain slope among rocks and bushes near Delta. The location of the find was very close to the road where Paige's personal belongings had been discovered 5 years earlier. The experts who arrived at the scene had almost no doubt they were looking at the body of the missing young mother. And soon, their assumptions were confirmed by DNA analysis and dental examination. The specialists suggested that Paige was brought to the hill bound, with duct tape over her mouth so that she could not call for help. Due to the condition of the remains, the exact cause of death could not be established. But it was evident that the woman had been brutally beaten. Several bones, including facial ones, were found to be broken. Ultimately, the experts concluded that Paige died from numerous injuries sustained as a result of the beating. It was also suggested that the body was initially buried, and then, due to soil erosion over the years, it ended up on the surface. Paige's funeral took place on April 28, 2012. Lester was arrested more than 2 years after the remains were discovered. In November 2014, he was charged with kidnapping, first-degree intentional homicide, and second-degree murder. But the victim's relatives had to wait until July 2016, when the trial of the criminal finally began. It lasted 22 days. The prosecutors claimed that Lester, who had previously shown aggression towards women, was furious that after the first session with Paige, he could not arrange a new meeting. The main witness for the prosecution was the defendant's ex-wife, Lisa. She said that in the late 90s, Lester had kidnapped her at gunpoint and promised to kill her. According to Lisa, the man could not accept that she had left him for another. So, Lester tracked them down and attacked them with a weapon. The bullet hit Lisa's new partner in the head, and a month later, Lester appeared before his ex-wife again, forcibly dragged her into his car, and said that now he would kill her and dump her body at the bottom of a lake. Fortunately, the woman managed to escape. She immediately filed a report with the police, and Lester was arrested for kidnapping and assault. The defense lawyers argued that the police had grabbed the wrong person and advised looking at the deceased's other clients. But they never voiced any plausible version of who else could have dealt with Paige. Lester himself did not appear in court. Instead, the prosecutors released recordings of his phone conversations with the police. After Lester's car was inspected, the investigators called him and reported that they had not found anything suspicious and would return the vehicle to him in a few days. In fact, this was a trick to make the man believe in his safety and lose vigilance. But Lester reacted with extreme wariness and repeatedly asked if they were really going to give him back his car. The defendant's current wife also testified at the trial. The woman admitted that she was upset by the news of her husband's exploits with prostitutes, but she stated that Christian values did not allow her to leave him. However, she not only failed to provide Lester with an alibi, but also recognized him in the footage from the store's surveillance cameras where he bought the disposable phone. On September 9, 2016, after hearing the arguments of both sides, the jury failed to reach an agreement. The court was forced to declare a mistrial, but the prosecutors were not going to give up. The district attorney was confident that he had sufficient evidence to find Lester guilty of Paige's murder. He devoted several days to carefully studying the investigation materials and reanalyzed each piece of evidence once more. And so, on November 21, 2016, 73 days after the first trial was cancelled, Lester appeared before the court again. This time, the prosecution provided evidence that a few days before Paige's disappearance, the defendant was hanging around his workplace and trying in every possible way to get in touch with her. This was confirmed by footage from surveillance cameras, which showed a white Chevrolet circling near Paige's Ford, appearing in the frame just when someone was persistently calling her. As it turned out, the car belonged to Lester's wife, who was out of town at the time. The defense insisted on the absence of direct evidence against their client. The lawyers even suggested that Paige could have been killed by a man who died in 2011 and who was initially also suspected of this crime. But other details also surfaced in court. In particular, on the night of Paige's disappearance, Lester left the house for an hour. He told his wife that he had supposedly forgotten to turn off the light in the workshop. The parties delivered their closing arguments on December 2, 2016, and on December 27, just before the end of the year, the jury finally reached a verdict. Lester was found guilty on all counts related to Paige's death, although he never admitted his guilt and did not reveal the motives for the crime. The judge sentenced the man to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Lester filed an appeal, but in June 2022, a panel of 3 judges upheld the verdict. At the same time, the judges of the second instance noted that, in this case, the kidnapping and intentional murder under aggravating circumstances should be considered as a single crime. However, this clarification did not affect the final verdict in any way. Today, Lester Ralph Jones is serving his sentence in a correctional facility in the state of Colorado. It is bitter to realize that the life of a young mother was cut short so early and so terribly. Despite the fact that the investigation dragged on for many long years, Paige's relatives did not give up and achieved justice. The dangerous criminal will spend the rest of his days behind bars, and he will never harm anyone again. But this could have been solved faster, and in my opinion, Paige could have even been saved if the system was more perfect. Write in the comments who you think could reform the system. Who do you support? I'm curious. I hope this tragic story will make us think once again about the fragility of human life and how important it is to cherish our loved ones. If you are interested in other high-profile investigations, visit the channel, subscribe, and turn on notifications for new episodes. Take care of yourself and see you next time.